Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this 5,000 watt Hausfeld generator. This is powered by a 9-horse Briggs Vanguard engine and was dropped off by a local subscriber, Chris. He was recently cleaning out a warehouse and came across this machine. It was destined for the trash and he didn't want to see that happen, so he brought it home with the intention of fixing it. He said he went through the carb, it was in pretty bad shape. He did get it clean enough to at least run the engine on choke, and it was at that point where he realized the generator was not making power. So yeah, not a good sign. More times than not, when the generator doesn't make power, it is a terminal issue, and likely this is a parts machine. So we're going to dig into that in a minute and find out exactly what's going on. I guess worst case, if this is a parts machine, that's okay, because we're going to get 3 more chances, because that was not the only generator in that warehouse. So we have a total of 4. They're all Hausfeld generators powered by 9-horse Briggs Vanguard engines. So I say we start with the one that Chris already did some work on. We'll figure out what the problem is and go from there. So now that it's up here on the lift, we can get a better look and just kind of give it a once over, see if we see any issues here. And I guess first off, this fuel line is not correct. It's very close to the exhaust, and usually this fuel valve is on the opposite side where the generator is. And the fuel line should drop down kind of below the head and the exhaust and then up into the carburetor. So this tank, I would say, is on backwards. And if you look at these generators, you can tell all these tanks are on correct because the fill, it's on the generator side. And actually, if you look at this one, you can see the fuel line comes kind of down below the exhaust. So that's what I would expect on this machine right here. Now, the heat shield also, I don't think it's in the right spot. That baffle right there should be further back. And if you look at the exhaust over here, there's actually no heat shield. That's just the plastic tank. So yeah, the heat shield, it's also on backwards. So we need to correct that. Looks like we have some random wires right here. This is for a solenoid to idle the machine down when there's no load. Now, I don't see anything that would connect to. So maybe this was just an unused feature that came with this engine. I'm not sure. And as far as the engine goes, it looks pretty complete, although we are going downhill. So yeah, I'm thinking we do have a broken engine mount. And yeah, that one is broken. So we will need to deal with that. On the generator side, it's a pretty simple setup. There is really no separate control panel. It's all right here. We have the circuit breakers. We got the 240 and the 120 out. And I believe this is brushless. So I'm going to start there. Let's get the multimeter out. We'll just check the resistance, see if there's any red flags, and then likely we'll open this up and take a look inside. I'm going to start just with a quick and dirty test. We can test the resistance of leg 1 and leg 2 through the outlets. Now, this isn't a perfect test because a lot of times the neutral and the ground, they are bonded together. So you really can't check for ground faults unless you disconnect all the wires from the stator and test each winding separately. But testing like this, you can tell a lot. You could tell if there's high resistance or an open circuit or something that doesn't quite seem right. Anyway, to do this, you're just going to need a multimeter set to measure resistance in ohms. And check the leads first to make sure you know the resistance of your leads. Sometimes it can be quite high. In my case, it's 0.1. So any reading I get, I can subtract the internal resistance of the leads. So I'm going to check leg 1 and leg 2. You can do it through here. Most likely this is leg 1 and leg 2. The 240 plug, though, is a little bit easier to identify what's what. The one here with this little tab, that is the ground, opposite's the neutral, then you have leg 1 and leg 2. So if I put a lead in the neutral, we can then test each leg. So we'll start with the one here on the left. We'll call that leg 1. And we're at 0.5 ohms, which seems reasonable. I don't know what the resistance should be on this generator, but most come in between 0.2 and 0.5. And of course, we have 0.1 in these leads. So it's actually closer to 0.3 ohms on that first leg. And the other leg should be the same, if everything's healthy. And it's not. We're at 1.2. So yeah, that is a red flag. There might be something wrong with the stator, which would explain why it's not working. Now, it doesn't mean there's a problem with the stator. I mean, that resistance could be coming from the outlet. It could be coming from the circuit breaker. So we do need to get this cover off. We will disconnect this panel and we'll test directly to the stator. The stator actually looks pretty good. I don't see any evidence of overheating. None of the lacing is broken, so that is definitely a good sign. This is also a brushless generator. There are no brushes here. There's no slip rings, but we do have a diode right there, and there's another one kind of opposite on the bottom. So that could be a point of failure. More commonly, though, it's the capacitor. We have a 10 microfarad capacitor right here. Now, it should have been secured, I think, something like that. So most likely this was removed. Chris did say he tested the capacitor and it tested well. We will double check that. But one thing I'm noticing here, if you look at the connections to that capacitor, there is a bunch of rust in there. And if that is preventing a good connection from the capacitor, then that for sure would prevent this from powering up. So that very well could be the issue. Also, we do have a ground wire just floating in space here. Most likely it was connected to one of these points, so we'll have to figure that out. But for now, I say we just unplug everything from the stator. We'll test each winding, make sure it's good, that we don't have any shorts to ground, and we'll check that capacitor, see if it's still at 10 microfarad. So we'll just double check this. Make sure it's discharged, which it is. Yeah, pretty rusty in there. And those connectors look nice and clean. All right, let's see if this stator is any good. Now, we did test it through the outlets, and we know it's not blatantly bad, but the resistance was off between leg 1 and leg 2, and almost 100% of the time, leg 1 and leg 2, the resistance should be the same or really, really close. And in this case, we had 1.1, 1.2 on one of the legs, and on the other, we had about 0.5. So that's a big discrepancy. And also with the control panel on, we had a bond between neutral and ground, which means you can't test that the insulation is actually good. Now, ideally, each winding should be separate. There should be no connection to ground, nothing cross-connected from leg 1, leg 2, or the DPE, because everything is isolated at this point. Now, I don't know what the known good values are for this particular generator, but most stators, leg 1 and leg 2, the resistance comes in at 0.2 to 0.5 ohms. So you want to see something in that range, and you want to see that leg 1 and leg 2 either match or are very close. So now we're checking one of the legs. We're at 0.4, 0.5. Seems good. Check it to ground. No connection to ground, so the insulation seems to be holding. We'll check the other leg, and hopefully we see the same resistance. And we do. So that's good. 0.4, 0.5. We'll check it to ground, and no connection to ground. So the difference we saw earlier between leg 1 and leg 2, that resistance must be coming from the control panel. So maybe a bad circuit breaker, or maybe not bad, but one that has, a little bit of corrosion on it. So we'll check that later. The main focus is the power head. I want to make sure it's good. And on the DPE winding, usually I see between 1 and 2 ohms, but this varies a bit between generators. And this one's at 2.5, so that seems reasonable. We'll check it to ground. No connection, so that is good. And let's just check from the DPE to leg 1. There should be no connection. Leg 2, there should be no connection. And there's not on either of those. And then just check between leg 1 and leg 2. We should have no connection, and we don't. So the stator seems to be healthy. It passed the low voltage test. We have no connections to ground. Nothing's cross-connected. So I don't think we have an issue with the stator. Potentially we do with the rotor, but on a brushless like this, it's very hard to test the rotor. And I will say, I haven't seen one fail yet. So that likely is not it, but we can't cross it off the list unless we're willing to remove the diodes to test that. So for now, let's shift over to the capacitor. Let's test that and make sure it's good. The rating on this is 10 microfarad plus or minus 5%. And you're never going to see exactly the rated amount, but it should be within the tolerance. And in this case, we are. We're at 9.71. So the capacitor seems to be fine. One last test I want to do here is just check the resistance again of the DPE winding, but this time through these terminals on the capacitor. Now that'll kind of tell me what the health is of these connections. Given we see some rust there, I want to make sure we get a similar reading, which was about 2.5 ohms on that winding. And yeah, that is what we're seeing. So although there's some rust here, it's not really impacting anything, and I don't think is the reason why this is not powering up. So I'm going to secure this capacitor. I'm going to leave the control panel off. We'll just probe in right here. And I want to get the engine running and just see what's going on as far as the voltage goes. Yeah, I guess the other unknown here was this capacitor floating around when Chris was testing. Meaning, was it not secured? Because if it was not secured, then these terminals potentially could have been shorting out on something, and that would also prevent this from powering up like it should. It's got oil. Should definitely be changed, but we do have enough to test with. So let's make it earn its oil change. So I'm going to get this airbox cover off. I want to make sure we don't have a critter in here, and likely I'm going to leave it off for testing. We might need to assist this engine running a little bit with some starting fluid. And it's kind of hard getting this airbox off with the engine sitting sideways. So yeah, let's actually deal with the engine mount issue now. Get this machine leveled out before we try to start it. Ah, can't do it. Tank's in the way. So let's pull the tank off. Now, there is a little bit of fuel in the tank. I'm not sure how old it is. So I'm going to drain that out first. Then we'll get the tank off. Yeah, I misread this one a bit. I thought this engine mount, the original one, was broken. And now that it's off, I can see it's not actually broken, but it is collapsed. So it did need to be replaced. And now that I have a bit of leverage, I was just double checking the other mounts. And the one right here, although it initially looked good, you know, if you look right here, when I lift up, you can see that one is actually just hanging on by a thread. So that one has to be replaced as well. And even down here on the power head side, we are missing some hardware. And if I lift up, you can see that also has issues. So for now, we'll just get this one replaced. So we'll at least have the engine held in place. You know, this one we can circle back on if we can get this generator head to make power. Just going to drain the carb real quick. Yeah, I'm not sure how recently it was that Chris tried running this, so the fuel in there could be less than fresh. And in this case, nothing's coming out. So either the drain is clogged or it's empty. Yeah, I'm thinking that drain is clogged. There we go. A little bit of fuel. It's a good thing I did that. A lot of what came out is water. You can kind of see the water line down there. I'd say about 50% of this is water. And there is a bunch of debris. So I'm going to connect up a temporary fuel supply. Just let it run through, flush out the bowl a bit, and then we'll try to start it. Oh, wow. That carb, not doing so well. The needle and seat, they are not playing nice, and it's flooding out severely. So, yeah, this carb needs to be gone through. I do have a clone carb for this engine, so I'm thinking we can circle back to this later. We'll put the clone on. I've never tried a clone carb on a Vanguard, so I'm not sure if it's going to run the engine too well, but it should run it better than this. So let's get this one off, throw on the clone, and then I think we'll be ready. Before I get this choke bracket back on, I'm going to remove this piece right here. This generator doesn't have anything that can use this. This is essentially an electromagnet. So when it's energized, it'll hold the throttle in the idle position. But yeah, on this machine, it serves no purpose. The wires are damaged anyway. So we'll just get it off of the bracket. But not with that battery. I already got an issue here with the clone carb. There's something wrong with the choke linkage. I can't get it to open and close. So I'm going to take this back off, take a closer look at what's going on. Seems okay now. Not sure what it was. It's actually the alignment of the airbox. If it's a little bit off, it hangs up the choke. So the opening Well, the choke plate must be a little larger than the OEM one. Well, I think we're pretty much ready to go. I have fueled up the carb and the needle's holding nice and steady. So at least the clone has that going for it. And I have rigged up a plug connected to one of the legs. Goes into this power strip. We have the multimeter connected, a light connected, although it's turned off. I'm not going to turn it on immediately unless I see voltage. You know, my concern is we have a residual magnetism issue. And if that light's turned on, it's not going to help anything. Now, assuming we don't have voltage, which I'm not expecting to, then I'm going to try to use the drill to flash the field. And with any luck, that'll bring power back to this machine. All right, let's give this a try. Choke on, ignition on. Well, that was very interesting. I guess first off, the engine itself sounds good. The carburetor, not running the engine so well. It's actually running the engine way too rich. So that carb is, I think, ultimately going to get returned. It is not suitable for this machine. So we will have to repair the OEM Mikuni, which is actually a discontinued part. Now, as far as the power output goes, it was kind of an odd result. You know, initially, I think I was seeing about 7 volts on the multimeter. The light bulb was not on. So I was getting ready to flash the field, or at least attempt it with the drill. And when I pulled the trigger down on the drill, I noticed the light bulb glowing a bit. Now, I'm not sure if it immediately started glowing or after I spun the drill once or twice. But whatever it was glowing dimly. And the drill was spinning slowly. So I tried a heavier load of 750 watts and then 1500 watts. And what I found is that when I put that load on, the light got brighter. You know, the heater was getting warm, although the fan wasn't spinning very fast. So it's really interesting what's going on here. I guess my initial thought is maybe that capacitor is bad, or maybe it's the wrong rating. You know, 10 microfarad, it is pretty small. Most generators that I've worked on have at least 40. So I'm going to pull the end cap off one of these other machines, see what's in there for a capacitor, and hopefully it's more than what we have on this machine. It's hard to tell. This one's pretty dirty, but this capacitor does look larger. So it gives me a bit of hope that maybe the wrong capacitor is in the other machine. So let me cut these zip ties, or actually maybe I can just unplug it and rotate it. This capacitor is pretty rusty too. It may not be in good condition, but if we have the value we need, then that might be good enough. And in this case, it's 25 microfarads. So that is quite a bit different than 10. So I think that's our issue on the other machine, most likely. Let's see if this rusted out capacitor is any good. .24 microfarad. So yeah, despite the rust on the terminals, this capacitor actually should work. So let me cut it out. We'll plug it into the other machine and try it again. All right, let's try this again. Pretty much the same setup as before. The only difference is we do have a space heater on standby, and this time the light's on, and of course we have a different capacitor in there rated at 25 microfarad. Amazing the difference the correct part makes. Now, that I was suspicious of going into this. This generator, unfortunately, I couldn't find any documentation on it. No user manual, no service manual. So if I hadn't have had these others that were the same model, I would not have known that the wrong part was in there. But now that we have the right part, it's making power. That light came on right away. We were at about 121 volts, 62 hertz, and I was able to load it up to 1500 watts without issues. So this machine, definitely a survivor. You know, the engine, the generator are both good. The carb, yeah, we need to go through that OEM carb and get that running better, because this carb, it's way too rich. I do not want to leave it on this machine. So let's get the carb opened up, see if we can save it. Actually, change of plan. Let's get the oil changed. It's definitely earned it. Perfect. So how bad do you think it's going to be? I mean, it looks halfway decent from the outside. And the bolt doesn't look bad. On really bad carbs, this would be severely rusted. And the fact that we could get the drain out is a good sign too. A lot of times when these carbs are really bad, that screw just breaks off. And yeah, actually looks pretty good. And I can see why we were flooding over. It was acting like there was no needle. And that's because the needle is in the bottom of the bowl. And unfortunately, this carb is shot. This arm is broken. And you got to be careful when removing the float. Those can break, which is too bad. I don't think this carb is going to be usable now because of that. Yeah. So definitely shot. Let me check my stash. I don't think I have any Mikuni carbs for a Vanguard, but I might. So let me dig around, see what I can come up with. It's really too bad that this is broken because the inside actually looks to be in excellent condition. So what I'm going to try real quick here is, well, to see if this jet fits in the clone carb. And I'd say the odds of that are low. Even though it's a clone, there are differences. I mean, take this bowl nut, for example. OEM is 12 millimeter. That one looks like 10. And, you know, is this jet exactly the same as far as the threads go and just the shape of it? Because what I'm thinking is, if it is, we can maybe move the jets over from the OEM to the clone to get it to run correct. And they actually look compatible. Let's see if it's the same thread. Yeah, actually, it is the same thread. So let's just double check it real quick. I want to see what the clone jet size was for the pilot jet versus the OEM. And we'll do the same for the main jet. The largest micro drill bit on the OEM that fits is a 79. So I assume the clone will be larger. Yeah, 79 is quite loose. So is a 78. 77. 76. Wow. 75. 74. 73. 72. 71. Yeah, so that is a big difference. The way these micro drill bits work, the smaller the number, the larger the drill bit. The OEM jet was a 79. And the clone one, same pilot jet, 71. Not even remotely close. So using the OEM pilot jet will certainly make it more lean. You know, I will say, though, the Mikuni jetting is always very lean. It's actually hard to get it to not surge. You know, so this may need to be drilled out, which is fine. You know, once it's too big, like this one, you can't put that material back. So let's check the main jets, see if they're compatible. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say they're not, because this main jet has a tiny thread. And a lot of times the clones won't copy something this small. They might use like a Honda style main jet where it's up the center instead of the side. And if they did use one on the side, chances are it's not going to be the same thread. So let's take a look. And yeah, this one has the main jet up the center. So we can't swap the main jets. But we can at least check this one, see how it compares to the original. Yeah, I'm guessing it's going to be smaller. Actually, that is a tiny jet, just like the original. Threads may even be the same. Let's double check. I am impressed. So I take back what I said about this clone. Yes, the jetting's off, but at least they matched the threads on the OEM carb. You know, why they didn't match the jetting, I don't know. All right, let's check the main jet on the OEM, see where it's at. I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere in the 60, kind of the mid-60s, so we'll start with 67, which fits fine. That one does not fit. So the largest one that fits on the main jet is a 68 for the OEM. So let's try the clone. And it does look smaller. Yeah, 68 does not fit. Actually, a 69 fits, and I was wrong. The OEM is a 66. So, yeah, at least these are a little bit closer. But I can say with fair certainty that if I switch to the OEM pilot jet, the clone carb is not going to run rich. It's probably going to run lean. So I'm thinking, let's use the OEM pilot jet and the clone main jet. And actually, this one had an O-ring on it, which we might want to transfer over. All right, let's try it out. All right, let's give this a try. OEM pilot jet, clone main jet. We are fueled up and ready to go. That was it. It was just the pilot jet. The clone pilot jet was just way too large. You know, this time the engine ran nice and smooth without a load. And the last time we ran this with the clone jet in there, the engine was shaking, it was sputtering, and that's a sign of incomplete combustion. Too much fuel, not enough air. And if given time, that'll carbon up the engine and cause problems. And of course, it's going to pollute. So yeah, it's kind of surprising because they did a very good job cloning that carburetor. And to get the jetting as wrong as they did kind of makes you wonder how that could have happened. Anyway, we're almost done, I'd say, with this machine. We just got to clean it up, get the airbox back on, secure the stator. You know, as far as the capacitor goes, I'm going to leave that one in there. We'll just order up a new one for the machine we stole it from. And then lastly, we'll get the control panel installed. But before I do that, let's just test it, see if we can't figure out where that extra resistance is coming from. Let's just double check the resistance of each of the wires coming from the control panel over to the connector. Now, last time we tested, when this was connected to the generator, we saw a higher resistance, I believe, on these two wires here. So we'll double check those real quick. Right now we're on the neutral. So we need to find that down here. Now, this should be a very low resistance connection, around 0.1, 0.2. And that's exactly where we are, so there's no issue there. Let's try this one. So 0.3, 0.4. That one's a little higher. Not much though. I mean, we're pretty close. Let's just double check over here. Let's see what that's at. 0.1, 0.2, 0.1. That is a good connection. And, to test all four wires, actually, we're going to have to test over here. So let's just do the same test. I want to make sure I test both neutrals. On this one, we only have one neutral wire. Or maybe they're combined. So that is a high connection, a high resistance connection. That's what we were seeing before. And let's see, is it this wire? Is that the equivalent over here? Yeah, it is. So we have a low connection from this outlet to that outlet, but from here to the input, it's a high resistance connection. So, I'm thinking it is the circuit breaker. So this bottom one, it looks like the red wire, which goes over to here. And then it jumpers over to here. So it goes from this connector to the circuit breaker, to that outlet, to this outlet. So the issue is between here and this outlet. And of course, what do we have in the middle? We have a circuit breaker. So let's test. Actually, let's just double check which connector it was. All right, so it's the one here on the bottom right. So we'll test from there to the output side of the circuit breaker. And that's a nice low connection. So circuit breaker actually isn't the problem. It must be this outlet, or more likely this connection here. This screw on the side looks pretty rusted up. So I'm thinking that might be our problem, but let's just probe it from the back side here, see what we get. Nice low connection. And that jumpers over to here. Let's check that. And nice low connection. So actually there's nothing wrong with the wiring, because we can go from one end all the way to the other. We have a nice low connection. So if anything, the issue is more likely some corrosion or just a bad spot on this plug. So let's just try it again. Maybe we can find a better spot. And yeah, now we have a good connection. So I think that's all it is. These terminals in here, they probably haven't been used in a while. And I think just plugging stuff in and unplugging it, it's going to clean that up real well. So yeah, now we're a little higher. Let's try it one more time. A lot higher. And now we're low again. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Those contacts, they should clean themselves up just with a little bit of use. I'm going to try to add a zip tie somehow to these wires. I'm just worried that, if they go in there and hit the rotor, that'll be the end of this generator. So maybe a zip tie kind of through the vent here, just making sure this stays kind of out of the way. I think we're at the point where we can roll this one off the lift and grab another one and bring it up on. Now, the one here on the end, we are still waiting for a capacitor on. It's going to be a couple more days, so we'll pass on that one for now. And the one right next to it, it's actually missing the carburetor, or I should say it's uninstalled. Chris did include it. It's right here in the box. But after looking it over, I can see that we have the same issue here. The little leg on the left is broken off. So we do need to order another clone carb and swap these OEM jets into it. So I'll get that ordered up. So we'll skip that one as well. And that just leaves this other one here in the corner. It seems to be complete. So I say we get that one up on the lift and take a closer look. And this one seems to be in much better shape. It's dirty, but less rust, less aluminum oxide. The engine mounts seem to be good, and we're not missing any hardware. I think the only thing we're actually missing here is a fuel line, and that is not a big deal to get installed. So before I get the engine running, I do think I want to pop this cover off. I want to make sure we have the same 25 microfarad capacitor. We'll test it real quick, make sure it's good, and quickly validate the condition of the generator head. And assume everything checks out, which I think it will, we'll move on and get that engine running. Yeah, someone's been in here because we are missing the capacitor. The ground wire is in a different spot, which is fine. It looks like it broke off right there. So, yeah, this is not going to run without a capacitor. So let me pull the end cover off the other generator and see what we have in there. This one is a different model. So there's a reasonable chance the capacitor is different as well. Nope, no capacitor in here. This one is brushed. So I'm just going to steal the capacitor from the generator we just finished for now. It's actually the next day. I decided not to pull that capacitor out. This machine, I just put it together, and I kind of want to leave it that way. Plus, the capacitor I ordered for that one is going to arrive later today. So, I think in this case, we will just wait for the correct part. And, I kind of misspoke earlier when I said there wasn't a capacitor in here. I mean, there is one. It is the wrong rating. And even if it was the right rating, that capacitor is polarity sensitive and is never going to work in a brushless generator. So that one is out. I think it's best just to wait. And I guess while we're waiting, I'm going to get that carburetor off. I'm sure it needs to be gone through, so we'll get that squared away. And then once the capacitor arrives, we'll get that plugged in and give this thing a try. I was worried there for a second. I thought this might not be a Mikuni. It looked a little different to me than the other one we pulled off, but it is a Mikuni. Although, interestingly enough, the word Mikuni is only on one side. Or maybe it is under here and I just can't see it. Either way, I think that is good news because, I might end up putting a clone on this one. I did order actually 2 more clone carbs, just anticipating that these are going to be pretty bad. And one of them has shown up. So yeah, we got a little bit of dust. And this one actually isn't that bad. The ears aren't broken. This throughway to the emulsion tube seems to be clear. Main jet looks clogged. But otherwise, this is in pretty good shape. It should clean up. So let me see if I can get this pin out without breaking anything. There we go. It looks like the emulsion tube is removable. I'll try to get that out. There we go. Emulsion tube looks to be in pretty good shape. And lastly, we have the pilot jet. And that is coming out. Yeah, so this carb I actually think is viable. We just need to clean it up. And yeah, that pilot jet looks clogged. So let's go through everything, make sure it's clear, and then we'll put it in the ultrasonic and put it back on the machine. This car may have actually run. The pilot jet was not clogged, and neither was the main jet. Although we did have a lot of debris, so that likely would have clogged things up pretty quickly. I'm just using some Dawn dish detergent. Not as effective as the Harbor Freight degreaser, but that degreaser has a new recipe, and it's now corrosive to aluminum. Granted, it does still work well on a lot of carbs, but some it reacts very poorly to. So we'll start just with the Dawn, and if that doesn't cut it, we'll try the Harbor Freight degreaser. It's cleaning up pretty well. I mean, the inside was fairly clean to begin with, except right there, and it has cleaned off. We're just left with some corrosion. That said, I'm going to give it another 5 or 10 minutes just to make sure. It cleaned up pretty well, but I did notice the O-ring here is broken, so I'm going to get that out. We'll try to steal one from the other carb, the one that has the broken arm. And with any luck, we can just swap it out. Yeah, that one's correct too. All right, well, we got one more parts carb. Let's take a look in there. Got it. Let's try it out. Theoretically, this engine should run, and I really want to hear it run before cleaning it up anymore. That said, the day has come and gone, and unfortunately the capacitor never showed up. That said, I do have capacitors. The problem is they're not 25 microfarad, but I do have one rated at 20 and another one rated at 30. So I'm thinking we give the 20 a try. That should be enough to excite the field and get the power to come on. So let me get this one installed. We'll put some fuel in the carb and try to start it. Being that this capacitor is a little undersized, the generator voltage will be low, but it should be a lot better than that 10 microfarad on that other generator. So I'm expecting the light to turn on. The voltage, I wouldn't be surprised if it was at least close to 100 volts. The only other thing of concern here is that this capacitor only has a rating for 300 volts. And usually I see ratings higher than that on these. That said, I don't think it's going to see 300 volts, so I think we'll be okay. Let's check the oil real quick. Yeah, oil's actually fairly clean. And it's right to the full mark. So it should be safe to start. All right, we are full right to there, and the needle and seat seem to be working, so we're off to a good start. So we've got a few things here on standby. I've got the light turned on. We have the space heater, a voltmeter in case things don't power up, and of course the kilowatt. So let's give the cord a pull and see what we get. That was pretty good. I mean, the engine started right up. It sounds good, and we're making power. So I would say we are just about there. You know, as far as the carb goes, yeah, it's not perfect. Without a load, there is a surge. So we're running a little bit lean. So I'm thinking one of two things here. I guess if we add the airbox back on, that might richen things up enough to get rid of that surge. So I'm going to try that first. And if that doesn't work, I think we need to pull the pilot jet and drill it out a size. Well, surprisingly, that was it. Just adding that air filter created enough drag on the airflow to richen things up, just enough to get rid of that surge. And now it's running pretty well. So I think we're going to be okay. I don't think we need to drill that jet out, but we will keep an eye on it. Anyway, at this point, I think it's time to get the oil changed. We'll get it cleaned up. And when the capacitor arrives, we'll get it installed and finish it up. Let's just check the oil level. That is pretty much perfect, right at the full mark. The new capacitor showed up today, actually two of them, and another clone carburetor. So let's finish this up and get this installed. And something I should have done on the other generator was pop this cover off, because the rotor bolt is right in the center. And there's a lot of wires here that you don't want touching that bolt. So it kind of gives you a little window to look in. Yeah, and I think you can see we are clear. None of the wires are touching that bolt. So I'll put the cap back on. I am going to just double check the other one to make sure. I was just cleaning up the tank, and I noticed on the bushing here we do have a hairline crack. So if it's not leaking now, it's going to be really soon. So we need to get that replaced. Well, that was easy. Got the tank reinstalled and all cleaned up. And I also made up a new fuel line, but I'm going to leave it off. And I probably should have left it off on the other machine because I am going to use the test tank to test these machines. So this one I would say is ready. So we now have two that are theoretically fixed. So I say we get them outside and put them to the test. See if they can still pull 5,000 watts. Well, it's a pretty cold day. It's windy, so I apologize if there's wind noise. And there's a chance of snow squalls, so this could get interesting. Anyway, I've got this machine hooked up to the load bank. This is the first one we fixed, the one with the clone carb and the OEM pilot jet. So the plan is, just to get it started, we'll let it warm up. We'll double check the outputs. And then I want to bring the load up to the max of 5,000 watts. Make sure that clone carb is up to the task. So we're starting off at 247 volts at 63 Hertz, and the THD 4.4%. So not too bad on the side wave. I know there's a lot of glare, so I'll take a picture and put that up on the screen. All right, let's try bringing a load on to 2,500 watts. We'll start with 2,000. Add another 5. And surprisingly, the THD did not move much. We're at 4.7%. Voltage pretty close to 240 volts. And the Hertz, 60.2. So yeah, that's actually pretty good. All right, now we'll go for the gold. So I'm going to take off this 500. We'll swap it for a 2,000. No issues. 4,500. 5,000. It's holding. 58 Hertz, 58.2. Voltage is at 223 volts. And the THD, not bad. 5.5%. Thankfully it's a nice cold day, so this cools off really fast. All right, this one performed really well. It started first pull. THD was surprisingly low. Under a full load, it went from 4% no load to 5.5%. So yeah, very clean. And the carb, what can I say? The clone, it's doing a good job with the OEM Pilot Jet. So let's get this unplugged. We'll move it out of the way and swap it with the other. All right, let's see how this one does. It is the same model machine. Really, the only difference is the fact that we have an OEM carb and we have a brand new capacitor on here. There's a slight surge in that OEM carb every once in a while. Anyway, we're starting at about 4.9% THD, the voltage 251 volts, and the Hertz 62.3. The sine wave looks about the same as the other machine. Anyway, let's bring on a half load. See how it does. We'll start with 2,000 watts. 2,500. Engine speed is fine at 61.2 Hertz. We're at 251 volts, and the THD, 5%. Pretty impressive. All right, let's bring it up to the max. 4,000 watts, 4,500, 5,000. Voltage is fine at 229 volts. THD is at 5.5%, just like the other. And the Hertz, 58.6. Yeah, like the other one, it's not too bad. All right, guys, I think that's pretty much a wrap. It is starting to snow and the wind is picking up quite a bit. Anyway, the second machine did just as well as the first. You know, in the end, these didn't need a whole lot other than the proper capacitors and carbs that could run the engine properly. And in the end, we have two very good running machines with clean output. Anyway, I'm going to wrap the video here. You know, next week we'll tackle the other two and hopefully make out as well. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.